Hi, you're watching FRCD on CAN TV. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is the Region 1 Parent Training and Information Center of Illinois. You can reach us at 312-939-3513. Email us at info@frcd.org and visit our website at www.frcd.org. We encourage you to visit us on Twitter at FRCDPTI and subscribe to our YouTube page at FRCD1231. We also encourage you to like us on Facebook. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is not a law firm or a legal service agency. Family Resource Center on Disabilities will not provide any type of services that may be construed as practicing law, including but not limited to giving legal advice, drafting legal documents, or representing families in any type of legal proceeding. Hi, my name is Paula Willis, and you're watching FRCD on CAN TV, where we discuss special education, parent advocacy, and resources for families of children with disabilities. And today I am back on FRCD on CAN TV, and I'm happy to have Zoubida Pasha, my colleague, back on our show today.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, Zoubida. And today we are discussing the general curriculum in terms of the IEP. You know, how does it fit in with the IEP? How does it fit in with special education? As some of you may know, last week we discussed related services, and prior to that we discussed the IEP meeting. So today we're talking about bridging the general curriculum in with special education services. So, without further ado, Zoubida, could you first explain to us what do we mean when we say general curriculum?
General education curriculum is the curriculum or the content that all students with or without disabilities are going to access. Okay. For our kiddos and people who are receiving special education services, that general education curriculum will be slightly modified depending on the need of the child. We all the time talk about the services and support depending on the unique need of the child or the person with disability who is receiving special education services. So general education curriculum, there is only one curriculum. I want to be specific and clear. There is only one curriculum for all our students, whether they have a disability or they don't, one curriculum. For our kiddos who are receiving special education, that curriculum will be changed, modified. So we hear sometimes modification. Modification definition is the change of the content of the curriculum. Example, if my child who had difficulties with comprehension question, the WH question, she can read a passage, but the modification will be lesser questions. Instead of bombarding her with 25 questions after reading a passage, we can say just 10. Okay. And they can be multiple choice question, for example. That's a modification.
You know, I mean, and oftentimes when we talk about special education, it's like, oh, my kid's in special education, or they're in a special education classroom. Special education is not a place. It's a series of services. Correct. So when we're talking, you know, as you pointed out, there is one curriculum. And basically, from what I've gathered from what you're saying, is that special education is basically, it's just that. It's just to bridge the gap so that the information that's being taught is accessible to someone who may be having more challenges.
Well, here is the other thing that I kind of learned throughout the years and with, you know, providing services to other people or when I was receiving services from Family Resource Center. I've learned that special education is access for success.
Right.
So that definition had resonated with me, and I kind of apply that in navigating with a parent and my own child. Like I said, one general education, one curriculum for all students. For our children who have IEPs, it is slightly modified, significantly modified. It may not be even modified if the child has social emotional issues that is not adversely impacting the ability to perform academically. Some of the kids, they don't have to have, you know, that modification. Possibly accommodation like extended time, preferred seating, all of those things that to accommodate to access for the kid to succeed.
Absolutely.
See, it's kind of an equation, but I like it, and it stayed with me, and it helps, that how to move the needle with certain parent who may have, oh, my child is in special education, they are not receiving quality. No. The special education is to receive
ensure that you
quality.
have quality. Even though we use the word appropriate, is to ensure that you have quality education. That's the purpose of it.
Right. And that falls under the umbrella of free, appropriate public education.
Right.
That is, right there.
You're entitled to.
Right. That's entitlement to quality education with the right support and services for the child to access for success.
Absolutely. So with that being said, how do we determine how much support a student needs?
That will be coming from the evaluation and the data that was gathered by the team prior to the IEP meeting. You remember we talked about the initial evaluation, right, or the 3-year re-eval to see if the child is qualified for special education, or just an annual review based on what the child had made in those goals. Did he or she made the expected progress towards those goals? Right. So we gathered that data, and if you remember, we talked about the present level. Present level can come from those goals that we had set for last year. Is the kid, did the kid achieve those goals? Then we can move the needle. Then evaluation data that show us where is the kid pertaining, to his grade level and his peers functioning. So that, if you can go back to that visual with the first visual, there you go.
The IEP team. Hang on.
Okay. Those are the things that we need to gather.
Ooh.
For the child to receive that modification in the curriculum, we will see how much progress did they make from last year and last goals, and all of that assessment. You remember we talked about classroom assessment, standardized assessment, to give us, that baseline of the student or their functioning at that grade level. For example, my 3rd grade example is all the time valid for all time. If that child is meeting the criteria for fluency, lexile, all of that in language art and reading, then we will move on to the next level. What is the next level for that 3rd grader? Is to answer question, WH question, to start a little summary by starting main idea, characters, yada yada, all of those things, pertaining to the reading, and move on. Like you said, is to bridge the gaps.
Absolutely. So one of the things I want to dive into, and it's looking like I don't have the actual chart that I wanted to use, the placement continuum, up, but let me see if we can put it up on overhead, if it comes up at all on overhead. So you probably can't see, and most likely we're going to read it to you, but this particular area, when we talk about placement continuum in terms of special education and the general education, could you kind of explain to the breakdown? So we know about the additional services and bridging the gap, and actually placement would be a completely different show, but I kind of want to discuss, what determines a student to be in general education, and then how does that student fit into that classroom setting as we add in more services?
Okay. See, it's a very good and great question, Paula. We have to be reminded that all students with IEPs belong to general education settings.
Okay.
Now, for that to be said, we kind of have that as a general idea, but we have to look into the functioning of the student and where they are. What does that mean? Like you said earlier, the special education is to bridge those gaps. So my 3rd grader, if he is delayed by 2 years, he still belongs in general education by accessing the curriculum and providing the supports and services, let's say for the core curriculum, language art, English, and math.
Okay.
These 2 areas, he may need extensive support. He may receive that support in general education setting by a teacher who is going to push in, come during that lesson and break it down based on his needs. If he has difficulties with understanding, then they have to kind of chunky up the work. When I say chunky up, is small portion at the time and step by step.
Okay.
If he has difficulties reading, then somebody has to read to him the passage so he can understand what it is.
Okay.
If the math at the third grade, they have to show their work at a certain level.
So when someone's reading to what, like, so is that general education you're saying with supplemental
With
aids?
supplementary aids, but we start the grades like you have the visual. It starts general education without supports. And I can give you an example without supports, without supplementary aids or supports. If the kid may have an IEP, but able to navigate on his own, he just gets, like a pull out, for example, for social work or nurse. And most likely they don't receive IEPs for those type, especially nurse. They get 504 accommodations. The second setting is general education curriculum with supplementary aids and supports and services. What does that mean? Maybe a push-in model through a teacher, special education, or an aide with the kid.
Okay, so we hear that term push-in a lot. Could you kind of break down what that means when we say push-in?
Push-in model through a special education is when the kid is in general education setting and a special education teacher is coming to help the student at that time, let's say again that math or reading lesson, to help him or her either read, comprehend, write, do the math. That's the push in. There is the push in and there is the pull out. They are kind of.
So pull out would be that the student leaves the classroom.
Correct. Physically leave the classroom.
Does that still put them on the second? I guess the second tier of the placement.
It's the third tier of the placement, which will be a resource.
Okay.
Now, that is the pull out. The kid will be out of the general education classroom, and those minutes are counted out.
Okay.
And that's when we have to look at the minutes. It says in a separate setting or classroom.
Okay.
And that defines sometimes the placement. So once we define the services and support, and we look at the time spent, the duration, the location of the services, it determines also the placement of the child. But we have to all the time go with the mindset that our children with IEPs belong first and foremost in general education settings with or without support. It depends on the unique need of our students.
So I'm going to throw in that term in the least restrictive environment, which is the first tier that Zoubida talked about, which is the general education with no supplementary aids. That is the least restrictive environment in terms of school. The second would be a more restricted, where there's, as you pointed out, the push-in, maybe the additional help, like a special education teacher coming into the classroom, or an aide. And then we're moving into the third tier, where the resource support, as you point out, is where the student is leaving the classroom for so many minutes a day.
Yes. And those minutes will define the next step. If the kid is removed more than 40%, that will be more restrictive. In a more restrictive environment. Least restrictive environment definition is the exposure to non-disabled peer setting. So general education, they are non-disabled peer settings.
That's correct.
So that's what it means. So if the kid is pulled out more than 40%, and you can find this information in the parent guide in chapter 7, page 55, it's very helpful how to navigate your child's services and support so you can understand what that placement, because sometimes we receive those calls and they said, we don't understand why my child is in this setting. Okay, let's look at the services and support based on their needs.
Could you talk about the next tier, the more restrictive environment? We start talking about self-contained.
Self-contained, it is more than 40% of the day exposure to disabled peer setting or general education setting. Self-contained classrooms, for example, is when the kid is spending the core curriculum there, for example, language art, math, science, and social studies. So right there it says it is more than 40% of the day. Some of the kids, they are out in specials such as art, computer, library,
Maybe gym.
gym with non-disabled peer. So those minutes are also counted outside of the special education. But the core curriculum, it would put the kid at that disadvantage of more restrictive environment if they need that support. When I say disadvantage, it's just the exposure.
Okay.
I'm not taking it, lightly, that any kid have a special need. They need maximum support. They need that maximum support.
Absolutely. So then we're going to move into the next tier, which is the separate special education day school. So I guess two questions there. So this is a completely separate building. That
Right.
right. So it's not necessarily even in the same school. It's a separate building.
Right.
So how are they still accessing the general curriculum if you're in a separate special education day school? And tell me if that's another show. But
it will be another show, because least restrictive environment, it's really big, and there are many layers that we need to cover. But briefly, for the separate special education day schools is for those who need that maximum support throughout the day.
Okay.
They cannot be in that general education setting with non-disabled peer.
Okay.
Example of behaviors that can impede the child functioning in general education settings. Some of the kids, they have special circumstances of severe learning disabilities that impede their learning and not be in that general education. And they need bits and pieces of information at a time. That's what their disability dictate.
Okay.
As far as curriculum, I will reiterate that it is one curriculum. No matter where they go, no matter what they do, it's going to be one curriculum. It's just going to be modified.
Okay.
Modified, change in content. Let's say you have my daughter who is in 10th grade. She's accessing the 10th grade, but at a really, really lower pace and very, very modified and shortened. They cannot give her all algebra.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So if she may not be at the level of doing algebra, then how are they accommodating?
They are giving her the algebra, but
You know what? I hold that thought. It looks like we have a caller.
Sure.
Hello, caller. Do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I have a question. So I was listening to the program a bit, and you've provided a lot of really great information. One question that I had was, do you have any tips or maybe some sites that you can refer me to if my child is experiencing any type of bullying because of his disability?
I'm sorry, did you say bullying?
Yes.
Okay, actually, the Pacer Center, you know what, let me see if I can go there right now. I'm going to actually I'll leave the camera on me, and I will make this small, and we'll go there together. Okay, so right now I'm on I'm heading to the Pacers National Bullying Prevention Center, and they have all kinds of information for bullying. So if you go to www.pacer.org/bullying/, they have resources for different stats, questions, if you're various ages. So if your child's a teenager, it's a very useful, and they've actually done a lot of work around this issue. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you very much.
And also, you can double check with your school district on the policies in case of bullying. Make sure you have a discussion with the school district if your child have an IEP with the special education department, and what are the safeguards for a child with a disability and their policies with bullying. So you would know how to navigate that, because it's kind of a lot of layers and sometimes complicated. But the first step is to let them know what's going on and ask for policies if they have any in place.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
So we are going to go back to the separate special education day schools for those who need that maximum support throughout the day, and that is going to be 100% of special education support and services with the exposure to general education curriculum modified for sure for those who needs modification, and some of the student need significant modifications. When I say significant, they may be functioning, for example, at 10th grade, but they have the reading portion, for example, question at 5th and 6th grade, depending on the functioning. I even, Paula, seen certain circumstances with the kids is in high school, but they still have that really delay of 1st to 2nd grade in certain areas. It's not a cookie cutter. It does not apply to all students. It depends on how that disability impacts the student.
Yeah, hence the term individualized education program.
Yes.
So we have just a few minutes, and I just want to kind of finish up the residential placement.
Residential placement is when they are spending the day for school and the night they are housed.
Okay.
So they don't leave the premises. So day school, they go back home.
Okay.
Residential, they don't go home, except on weekends or holidays or however it is set up for that particular student. But residential, basically, they are educated there and they spend the night there as well. That is more restrictive because now we're talking about spending the night. The exposure to non-disabled peers is likely 0. Then from there we go. I'm going to just jump to the next step.
Go for it.
From the residential, we're talking about hospital or home settings. Hospital settings is for those who cannot really make it to school due to medical needs. The homebound also for those who cannot make it to school for medical, emotional needs, or whatever the case may be. There are kids who had a surgery and they are not allowed to go out, to school, so they need that homebound. And the hospital setting is very restrictive. Basically, you would know they will be in front of doctors instead of peers.
Okay.
And at home, they will be with parent and family instead of peers. So least restrictive environment is discussed after the goals, the benchmarks, related services, all of what is coming with the package of special education support and services. This is the last discussion. This should be, the last thing that we go when we go to an IEP meeting.
Right.
We don't go with the placement first. We go what my child's needs are. How can you support those needs?
Absolutely, yeah. We kind of jumped ahead here, but I felt it was important that we get a strong understanding, or at least I shouldn't say strong, but kind of an understanding of why some students end up where, and how this is kind of balanced out. So again, special education is a series of services and not a place. Mm-hmm. Even though we use the word placement in terms of where a student will be in terms of the general curriculum. Special education is really about bridging that gap, and some students have more of a gap to bridge than others.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are so right. And we have to also watch how the progress is made by bridging those gaps. Some students, they get it faster than others. For those who have students, they are a little bit delayed. They have to give it a little bit of time. Right. And when I say a little bit of time, I'm not talking about years, but kind of a couple of weeks to see where those strategies, are they working or not working? So if there is no progress at all, when I say no progress, within a month, and I see my son or my daughter stuck, then I have to open a conversation.
Yes.
Those services and support are not working, maybe the change of strategies or intervention, or if anything is needed to be added on to the support, it can be just a modified paper. It can make a difference, or a different seating. It depends on each student's needs, and you said it very well. It's individualized. It's very much individualized.
No, absolutely. Well, this is pretty much all the time that we have today, and I want to thank you, Zoubida, for helping us. I shouldn't say completely understand, but introducing us to the placement continuum in terms of the IEP process. Again, my name is Paula Willis. You've been watching FRCD on CAN TV, and this is Zoubida Pasha.
Thank you
again.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, all.
Happy Thanksgiving.